biting wind was Malcolm Jefferson's constant companion. It didn't whisper tales of valor or forgotten battles. It simply bit, reminding him of the concrete bench that had become his bed, the endless stretch of urban anonymity that had become his world. At 68 years old, Gunny Mac, as he was once known, was a silhouette swallowed by a coat 2 sizes too big, a faded olive drab against the indifferent gray of a bustling city. The lines on his dark face weren't just wrinkles. They were etchings of time, of loss, of battles fought both overseas and, far more cruelly, within himself. His hands, gnarled and scarred, once held the weight of command, the lives of young Marines. Now, they simply trembled, trying to cup what little warmth the alley vent offered on a frigid night. This morning, however, the chill wasn't just in the air. It was in the sterile, fluorescent glow of the city's municipal court. Case 93C. That was him. Not Malcolm Jefferson, Gunnery Sergeant, United States Marines. Not the man who'd seen the worst of humanity and still believed in the best. Just a case number. The charges were as mundane as they were soul-crushing. Disturbing the peace, trespassing, resisting arrest. Each word from the clerk's mouth was a tiny pinprick, deflating the last vestiges of a dignity he clung to with surprising tenacity. He sat slouched, his shoulders rounded, a posture of weary defeat. Once he'd worn dress blues, medals glinting like captured stars on his chest. Now he waited for judgment in second-hand clothes from a shelter, the scent of antiseptic cloying in the air. "State your name," the clerk droned, her voice devoid of inflection, a robotic command in a place that stripped individuality bare. Mac's gaze remained fixed on the scuffed linoleum floor. He cleared his throat, a dry rasp escaping his lips. Then slowly, almost instinctively, his back straightened a fraction. The years of discipline, of leading men through hell, asserted themselves, however briefly. "Malcolm Jefferson," he answered quietly, his voice trembling, but carrying a ghost of authority. "Gunnery Sergeant, United States Marines." A ripple, almost imperceptible, went through the otherwise stagnant air of the courtroom. The young prosecutor, polished and rehearsed, continued his monotonous recitation of complaints. 3 from the cafe owner, warnings about lingering behind Jefferson Street Cafe. He omitted the crucial detail. Mac never begged. He never asked for handouts. He just sat near that alley vent, a silent sentinel, trying to coax warmth from the urban currents when the winter night closed in around him like a suffocating shroud. He was a shadow, not a threat. Yet, shadows are often misunderstood, perceived as dangers. Then came the officer's testimony. Found him behind the cafe at 11:45 p.m., refused to vacate when ordered. That wasn't entirely true. Mac hadn't refused. He'd quietly asked for 5 more minutes, just 5 more minutes to finish half a sandwich, a meager gift from a kind cook who understood hunger not just as a physical ache, but as a deep, gnawing loneliness. But back then, his words hadn't mattered. That still didn't, in this antiseptic chamber where facts were often presented without their vital context. "Your Honor," the prosecutor continued, his voice devoid of empathy, "this is his 3rd citation this year. We recommend 30 days of community service and a no trespass order for downtown." A no trespass order. That simple phrase, delivered so casually, would bar Mac from the 4th Street shelter, the only warm place he had left. It would shut him out from church meals, leaving him utterly alone outside during the coldest stretch of the year. It was a death sentence delivered with bureaucratic precision. He rose slowly, his joints aching, worn down by time, by untreated injuries from Vietnam, then Iraq, wounds both visible and buried, carried without complaint across decades. This wasn't just a legal battle, it was a deeply personal one, a fight for the basic right to survive. Mac was a living testament to a painful truth often ignored, that even the bravest among us, those who answered the ultimate call, can find themselves utterly abandoned by the very society they protected. Just like a real-life veteran I once read about, forced to choose between hypothermia and a night in a jail cell, his service medals gathering dust in a forgotten box somewhere. The tragic irony is that while we celebrate our heroes, the complex web of bureaucratic hurdles, the stigma of bureaucratic health challenges, and plain old societal indifference often lead them in invisible cages, just like Mac. Many believe veterans automatically receive comprehensive support, a misconception that blinds us to the harsh reality of their struggles to navigate red tape, battle their inner demons, and cope with a world that quickly forgets their sacrifices once the parades are over. Mr. Jefferson, Judge Camille Dubois finally addressed him. Her voice was clear, composed, betraying nothing. Yet, as she glanced through his case file, her hand suddenly paused. Her skin, under the harsh courtroom lights, turned subtly pale. That name, she thought. That name. The thought. That name belonged to a ghost. A ghost from her past that was about to shatter the rigid decorum of her courtroom. The first crack in the wall of silence surrounding Malcolm Jefferson's forgotten valor had just appeared. Judge Camille Dubois was a woman of ironclad composure. Years on the bench had sculpted her into an unshakable figure, her face a mask of judicial neutrality. But as her gaze landed on the name in the worn file, Malcolm Jefferson, something inside her seized. Her hand, poised to turn the page, trembled almost imperceptibly, and a faint pallor washed over her usually warm complexion. The murmur of the courtroom, the rhythmic tapping of a bailiff's pen, it all faded into a distant hum. All she could hear was a name, whispered across 2 decades, a name etched into the very fabric of her soul. Her mind, usually a precise instrument of logic, was suddenly assaulted by a torrent of memories, sharp and vivid as if they were yesterday. Not the polished wood of the bench, but the suffocating dust of Fallujah, Iraq, 2004. The cacophony of war, the relentless crackle of small arms fire, the terrifying thud of mortars, the screams that echoed not just in the air, but in the deepest parts of a sister's heart. She saw him, her younger brother, Lieutenant Daniel Thorne, brilliant, idealistic, barely out of college, pinned down, wounded, exposed. He was trying to pull a fallen medic to safety, utterly oblivious to the storm of bullets tearing up the ground around him. Then, through the chaos, a figure emerged. A shadow against the blinding sun, moving with an impossible swiftness. A Marine, older, stockier, with an unyielding determination etched on his face. He didn't hesitate. He charged, not for glory, but for life. Camille could almost smell the gunpowder, feel the grit in her teeth as this stranger, this guardian angel, threw himself into the fray. He dragged Daniel to cover, shielding him with his own body, returning fire with chilling precision, buying precious seconds for others to retreat. "No Marine gets left behind," she heard Daniel's voice, clear as a bell in her memory, quoting the man who saved him. "Not while I'm still breathing." Daniel had written about him in every letter home, the gunny who had defied orders, defied death to save his men. "He's a legend, Camille," Daniel had scribbled in his last letter, his youthful handwriting full of awe. "If not for him, none of us would have survived that ambush. He's the truest hero I've ever known." 2 weeks after writing that letter, Daniel was gone, killed by an IED on a desolate road. For 20 years, Camille had carried the weight of that loss and the haunting curiosity. Who was this man, this Malcolm Jefferson, who had given her brother those precious extra days of life? She'd searched, discreetly at first, then more desperately, only to be met with dead ends. Redeployment, discharge, a mention of severe PTSD and a traumatic brain injury on a redacted report that made him virtually untraceable. He had simply vanished, a phantom hero in a world that moved on. And now here he was, not the hardened, formidable Marine she'd imagined, but a frail, broken man sitting before her, accused of petty crimes. The irony was a bitter taste in her mouth. The very system she served, the very nation he had fought for, had somehow allowed its most valiant to slip through its cracks. This wasn't just a random case. It was a cosmic collision. Malcolm Jefferson, the man who saved her brother, the man who had haunted her memories for 2 decades, was now her defendant. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. The disheveled man, who now barely registered in the public eye, was the same legendary figure from her brother's final, grateful words. It highlighted a chilling truth about our society, the systemic errors, the bureaucratic blind spots, the shocking anonymity of homelessness. How many other Malcolm Jeffersons were out there, their heroism forgotten, their sacrifices unacknowledged? Mac's unaddressed PTSD and TBI weren't just abstract medical terms. They were the invisible anchors that had slowly dragged him down. The untreated trauma, the bureaucratic nightmare of claiming benefits, his wife's departure while he was still overseas, the subsequent inability to hold a job due to his injuries, each step a domino falling, until he lost his home, his sense of purpose, and eventually his place in the world. He wasn't just a victim of circumstances, he was a casualty of oversight, a testament to a system that could send men to war but struggled to bring them home. The judge's gavel remained untouched, her gaze fixed on the man before her. The prosecutor, noticing the sudden silence from the bench, fidgeted slightly. The bailiff, sensing an unusual shift in the courtroom's rhythm, looked up. No one understood the silent storm brewing behind Judge Dubois' calm exterior. But the air was suddenly charged, electric, with the unspoken past. Just as the silence threatened to stretch into an uncomfortable eternity, the courtroom doors creaked open once more, and a new figure stepped in, oblivious to the emotional tempest he was about to step into. A new player in a drama that was about to unfold in the most unexpected ways. Just as the silent storm brewed behind Judge Camille Dubois' stoic facade, the courtroom doors creaked open, drawing every eye. A man stepped in, impeccably dressed in a custom-tailored suit, his presence commanding immediate attention. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to power, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Malcolm Jefferson. "Your Honor." The man's voice was smooth, resonant, cutting through the thick silence like a well-oiled blade. "Alexander Thorne, counsel for the defense." He strode purposefully towards Mac's table, settling beside him with a practiced ease that made the worn-out veteran flinch slightly. Mac blinked. A lawyer? He hadn't requested one. He certainly couldn't afford one. He hadn't spoken to anyone. His mind, dulled by hardship, struggled to grasp the sudden turn of events. Alexander Thorne leaned in, his voice a low, reassuring murmur. "Gunnery Sergeant Jefferson," he began, "my firm has been retained to represent you, pro bono." "For free?" The words hung in the air, unbelievable. "Thorne, Dubois, and Partners," Alexander added, almost as an afterthought. A sharp, almost imperceptible intake of breath from the bench. Judge Dubois' eyes, which had been fixed on Mac, snapped to Alexander. Thorne, Dubois, the family name, her maiden name linked to her late husband's prestigious law firm. Alexander Thorne, her late husband's closest friend, his former law partner, one of the very few who still called her Camille outside the courtroom. A subtle glance passed between them, a silent communication that spoke volumes. Alexander, perceptive as ever, had read the file, had seen her reaction, and had understood the profound, personal connection. The very name of his firm, unknown to the rest of the room, was the quiet signal that this was no longer just a legal case, but something far, far more intimate. An ethical dilemma, stark and unforgiving, slammed into Camille. Her judicial integrity demanded she recuse herself. A conflict of interest, clear as the noon sky. Yet, looking at the slumped figure of Malcolm Jefferson, the man who saved her brother, the man for whom her brother had sacrificed his life, a deeper, more primal sense of duty overwhelmed her. She pictured Daniel's eager face, heard his voice in her mind. Mac was the best of us. How could she step away? How could she abandon the man who had embodied the very best of their nation, the man whose heroism had shaped her family's fate? Her duty was not just to the letter of the law, but to the spirit of justice, and to a debt of gratitude that transcended legal statutes. Her decision was instantaneous, unshakable. She would not recuse herself. She would see this through. She would ensure that Malcolm Jefferson, the forgotten hero, received the justice he deserved, even if it meant bending the rigid expectations of the courtroom just a little. "The court will take a 15-minute recess," Judge Dubois announced, her voice firm, leaving no room for argument. The gavel finally came down with a decisive thud, its sound echoing the unyielding resolve in her heart. As everyone began to stir, she wasted no time. In the quiet sanctity of her chambers, away from the prying eyes of the court, she picked up the phone. Her fingers, usually so steady, trembled slightly as she dialed a number she knew by heart. "Colonel Arthur Maxwell," she stated into the receiver, her voice dropping to a low, urgent tone. "It's Camille Dubois. I need your help. It's about Daniel and someone very important he knew in Fallujah." The suspense thickened, a palpable energy now filling the formerly sterile courtroom, though no one but Camille knew why. This wasn't how justice was supposed to work. Typically, the justice system is portrayed as cold, impartial, a dispassionate machine grinding through cases without emotion. But sometimes, just sometimes, a rare convergence of fate and human connection can shatter that veneer. We often see examples in the news, brief, heartwarming stories of judges or lawyers who go above and beyond, discovering a personal link to a defendant that leads to an unexpected act of compassion. These aren't the norm, but they serve as powerful reminders that even within the most rigid structures, humanity can break through. Camille's decision wasn't about favoritism. It was about honoring a sacred debt, ensuring that a man who had exemplified selfless duty was not, in the end, abandoned by the very values he upheld. The clock in the courtroom ticked, each second amplifying the mystery that now hung heavy in the air. Malcolm Jefferson, still bewildered, watched Alexander Thorne, the lawyer whose presence was as inexplicable as it was welcome. He had no idea the woman behind the bench, the Judge Dubois, was now engaged in a desperate, deeply personal mission on his behalf. A mission fueled by a brother's memory and a hero's forgotten sacrifice. The stage was set, the players in place, and the next act promised to unravel a truth that would shake the very foundations of the courtroom. Exactly 10 minutes later, Judge Camille Dubois returned to the courtroom. Her posture was flawless, her voice steady, her face an unreadable mask of judicial composure. But those who knew her well, like Alexander Thorne, who stood calmly beside Malcolm Jefferson, might have noticed the faint tremor in her hands as she adjusted her papers, or the way she bypassed her glasses, her gaze sharper, more direct. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice cutting through the hushed anticipation, "has your client made a decision?" Alexander rose smoothly. "Yes, Your Honor. We're asking for dismissal of all charges." Mr. Jefferson wasn't trespassing. He was trying to survive a dangerous freeze, and we can demonstrate that restaurant employees gave him implied permission to be on the premises. The prosecutor opened his mouth to object, but Judge Dubois held up a hand. He fell silent, a rare occurrence. "I have questions for the defendant," she stated, her focus turning entirely to Mac. "Mr. Jefferson, your military file lists Fallujah, 2004. Is that correct?" Mac straightened, decades of instinct returning, a faint spark igniting in his weary eyes. "Yes, ma'am. 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines." "And on April 17th, she pressed, her voice unwavering, "were you part of an operation near the western edge of the city?" Confusion flickered across Mac's lined face. "Yes, ma'am. We were escorting a supply convoy when we got ambushed." "Ah, during that firefight," she pressed on, her voice imbued with a quiet intensity that held the entire room captive. "Did you rescue a wounded officer, Lieutenant Daniel Thorne, while under enemy fire?" The courtroom stilled. Every breath seemed to hold. Mac's eyes narrowed, the name sinking in, stirring memories buried beneath layers of hardship and forgotten time. "Thorne," he said softly, a ghost of recognition in his voice. "Yes, young lieutenant. Brave. Took a hit trying to pull a wounded medic out of the line of fire." His voice drifted, lost in the recollection. "I reached him, dragged him behind cover. He kept shouting at me to go help the others instead. Told me to leave him behind." The raw vulnerability in his tone, the lingering pain of that moment, was palpable. In the gallery, a silver-haired man in a veteran's jacket, who had been listening with rapt attention, leaned forward, his focus sharpened. This man, a Marine himself, had seen countless horrors, but the story unfolding before him was different. "And what became of Lieutenant Thorne?" Judge Dubois asked, her expression composed, though everything beneath it trembled. "We got him on the Bird," Mac answered softly. "He made it to Germany, I heard, but a few weeks later his convoy hit an IED." His voice caught. "For years I've wondered if saving him only delayed the inevitable. Maybe I made it worse." The unspoken guilt, the crushing weight of a hero's burden, hung heavy in the air. This was the silent torment of a man who believed his best efforts might have ultimately led to greater tragedy. Before anyone could respond, the silver-haired Marine in the gallery suddenly rose, his voice, crisp with authority, cut through the silence. "That's him," he said loudly, pointing at Mac. "That's Gunnery Sergeant Jefferson. I was there. He saved 6 of us that day." The room stirred, murmurs rippling through the crowd. Judge Dubois tapped her gavel once, firm but missing its usual edge. "Order," she commanded, though her voice didn't carry its typical weight. The courtroom settled into a tense hush. Mac kept his gaze low, clearly uncomfortable with the sudden spotlight bearing down on him. The older Marine, however, didn't sit. Standing at full attention, his voice was steady. "Your Honor," he said, "I don't mean to interrupt, but I was there. Jefferson took fire pulling that lieutenant out." The prosecutor stood, visibly flustered. "Your Honor, while Mr. Jefferson's military service is commendable, it's not relevant to these charges." Judge Dubois cut in sharply. "The court disagrees. It is deeply relevant." She placed her gavel down slowly, deliberately. "This court will recess for 10 minutes. She turned to the bailiff. "Please, see that Mr. Jefferson remains here." Then, just as she started to leave the bench, she paused. Something rare. Her eyes met Mac's for the first time, truly met him. "Mr. Jefferson," she said softly, her voice filled with a profound depth of meaning. "When I return, there are matters far beyond this case that we need to discuss." Inside her chambers, the judge finally let her guard drop. She pressed shaking fingers against her lips, as if containing 20 years of buried grief and silent prayers. Then, after a long, shuddering breath, she picked up the phone. "Colonel Arthur Maxwell," she said, her voice raw with emotion. "It's Camille Dubois. Yes, I know it's been a long time, but I need a favor, and I need it urgently." She briefly explained the situation, the revelation, the chance encounter that promised to right an old wrong. Exactly 10 minutes later, she returned to the courtroom. She was not alone. 3 Marines followed behind her. A full colonel, a master sergeant, and a young corporal carrying a polished wooden case. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd at the sight of those uniforms. Mac stood instinctively, his joints stiff but his posture proud. Muscle memory had overpowered the years of hardship. Judge Dubois took her place, but instead of reaching for her gavel, she set it aside. For the first time in her judicial career, she addressed the courtroom not as a judge, but as a person. "Before we proceed," she said clearly, her voice echoing with a raw, powerful emotion, "I must share a personal connection to this case." She looked directly at Mac, her gaze unwavering. "The Lieutenant Daniel Thorne, mentioned earlier. That was my brother." Gasps echoed across the room. Mac's brow furrowed, recognition flickering brightly in his eyes. The tension in the room was thick enough to feel. 20 years ago, Camille continued, her voice holding steady, but her eyes wet. My brother wrote home about a gunnery sergeant who saved his life in Fallujah. He said this man ran through enemy fire to reach him after he was wounded, then covered the rest of his unit as they evacuated the wounded. That man was Gunnery Sergeant Malcolm Jefferson. From the gallery, the silver-haired Marine from earlier stepped forward again. "It's true," he said, his voice ringing out. "I saw it with my own eyes. Jefferson took 2 rounds, pulling that officer to safety." Judge Dubois gave a small, acknowledging nod, then continued. 2 weeks later, my brother was killed in action. At his funeral, several Marines approached our family. They spoke of Daniel's courage, but also of the man who'd given us 2 extra weeks with him, time we otherwise never would have had. She looked directly at Mac, her voice thick with emotion. "After Daniel's death, I tried to find you, but the Marine Corps said you'd redeployed. Years later, I learned you'd been discharged, but no one could tell me where you went. I never stopped searching. And now, whether by fate or something higher, you walk into my courtroom." She motioned to the colonel beside her. "This is Colonel Arthur Maxwell," she said. "He commanded my brother's unit. He has something to share." Colonel Maxwell stepped to the bench, his bearing impeccable. "Gunnery Sergeant Jefferson," he began, his voice resonating with gravitas. "The Marine Corps has been trying to locate you for quite some time. Your personnel file was one of thousands reviewed under the Veterans Reconsideration Initiative." He explained that new intelligence regarding Mac's deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan warranted an update to both his commendations and his benefits. The corporal beside him opened the polished wooden case in his hands. Inside, a medal rested on deep blue velvet. "By order of the Secretary of the Navy," the colonel announced, his voice clear and powerful, "in recognition of extraordinary bravery on April 17, 2004, the Navy Cross is hereby awarded to Gunnery Sergeant Malcolm J. Jefferson, United States Marine Corps." Gasps echoed across the courtroom. The Navy Cross, the second highest honor after the Medal of Honor. "Until recently, portions of your mission were classified," Colonel Maxwell continued, "but your actions that day didn't just save Lieutenant Thorne and 5 Marines. They disrupted an ambush that could have wiped out the entire convoy. Your Silver Star has been formally upgraded." Mac's jaw clenched. For the first time, his composure cracked. "There must be some mistake," he said quietly, his voice barely a whisper. Well, didn't do anything special, just did my job." "No mistake, Sergeant," the colonel replied, his voice resolute. "And this is long overdue." From the gallery, the silver-haired Marine's voice rang out with crisp authority. "Attention on deck!" He stood at full attention, and others followed. Veterans, former officers, even civilians who recognized the weight of sacrifice. One by one, they rose and saluted Malcolm Jefferson. Soon, the entire room was on its feet, even the prosecutor, caught between legal decorum and human decency. Judge Dubois, no longer able to contain herself, wiped at her tears. Her voice shook as she spoke, the words echoing through the now standing courtroom. In light of these extraordinary developments, all charges against Gunnery Sergeant Malcolm Jefferson are hereby dismissed permanently. She brought down the gavel with force. This courtroom is adjourned. The shift was profound, a sudden, powerful undercurrent of emotion that transformed a sterile chamber of law into a sanctuary of recognition and redemption. It was a stark contrast to the thousands of similar cases across the country where veterans, just like Mac, faced legal battles without their stories ever truly being heard. This unexpected plot twist wasn't just a dramatic turn of events. It was a powerful statement about the true meaning of justice, not just punishment, but understanding, recognition, and the unwavering commitment to honor those who have given everything. But a second of dramatically, which was a lesson in how deeply human connection can influence the cold machinery of the law, and how, sometimes, the greatest battles are won not with bullets, but with truth. The unspoken stories of countless forgotten heroes living on the margins resonated through this single powerful moment. As the room began to settle, a master sergeant approached Malcolm Jefferson, a tablet in hand. The atmosphere, once thick with legal tension, now thrummed with something akin to reverence. "Sir," the master sergeant said, his voice respectful, "we've been trying to find you to correct your VA records. Your disability rating has now been reassessed. 100% service-connected. Retroactive to your original discharge date." Mac blinked, stunned, the words barely registering. "What does that mean exactly?" he asked quietly, the weight of the last few hours, indeed the last 2 decades, pressing down on him. "It means you're entitled to full back pay, sir," the master sergeant replied, a gentle smile on his face. "Complete medical coverage, housing assistance, educational benefits, anything you need going forward." It was a complete reversal of fortune, a wave of hope washing over years of despair. Alexander Thorne stepped forward with purpose, his earlier calm now infused with a quiet triumph. "Our firm will make sure every single piece of that is processed," he stated, his voice firm. "No more delays, no more stonewalls." Mac watched him, a bewildered gratitude slowly dawning in his eyes. He hadn't called this lawyer. He couldn't afford him. Yet, here he was, not just representing him, but fighting for his very future. Then, from the back of the courtroom, Marcus, the cook who'd slipped Mac sandwiches behind the cafe, stepped forward, his eyes brimming with emotion. "My dad used to tell me," Marcus began, his voice thick with tears, "there was a Marine who saved his whole platoon. He said, if you ever meet a man named Malcolm Jefferson, you owe him everything." Marcus reached out a hand, tears slipping freely down his cheeks. "I never knew that man was you. Not until today." It was another twist, a deeply human connection emerging from the most unexpected place, proving that even the smallest acts of kindness can carry a profound, unspoken history. Even the prosecutor, visibly moved by the raw emotion cascading through the room, approached slowly. "Sir, I had no idea," he stammered, his polished demeanor gone. "Please accept my sincerest apology for how this case was handled." Malcolm Jefferson stood amid the rising room, his posture regaining its quiet power, as though decades of unspoken honor were finally being lifted, one breath at a time. Judge Camille Dubois stepped down from the bench. There was no distance now, no barrier between them. She stopped in front of him, her voice steady but filled with profound meaning. "My brother once told us what you said to him that day," she began softly. "No Marine gets left behind, not while I'm still breathing. Today, Gunnery Sergeant Jefferson, we finally keep that promise to you." It was the true emotional climax, the convergence of past and present, of duty and an overdue debt of gratitude. 2 weeks later, Malcolm Jefferson stood before a mirror, adjusting to a life that still didn't feel real. He was inside a quiet apartment, part of a housing program built specifically for veterans like him. The walls were simple, bare except for one frame, a display of his newly awarded Navy Cross, flanked by his long-lost Purple Hearts and service medals. Alexander had tracked them down, recovered from a storage locker sold off years ago. A soft knock pulled him back. He opened the door to see Camille Dubois, not in robes, just herself, holding a small box. "May I come in, Gunnery Sergeant Jefferson?" she asked. "Just Malcolm is fine," he said with a humble smile. "Then it's just Camille," she replied, stepping inside. They sat across from each other in the modest living room, the quiet of their shared past thick in the air. "I brought something," Camille said, opening the box. Inside was a bundle of worn letters, carefully tied. "They're from Daniel. He wrote us weekly while he was deployed." She handed one to Malcolm. "This one mentions you. It stated the day after you saved him." His hands trembled slightly as he unfolded it. Daniel's handwriting, clear, sharp, just like he remembered. "Mum. Dad. Don't worry about the news. I'm safe thanks to one of our NCOs. Staff Sergeant Jefferson did something yesterday I still can't believe. When our unit was ambushed, he moved through enemy fire like it didn't exist. He refused to leave me, even when I ordered him to. Said no Marine gets left behind, not on his watch." Malcolm's voice cracked, tears finally blurring his vision. "He mentioned you often," Camille added quietly. "Said you were the Marine he looked up to." "Was a good officer," Malcolm said softly. "Still young, but he cared about his people. That's rare." Camille looked around the apartment. "After Daniel died, I went to law school," she said. "This, the Veterans Court program, the housing initiative, it all started because of the things he wrote about how the system forgets its own." Malcolm shifted uncomfortably. "Oh, I'm not a hero," he said. "I just did what needed to be done." "That's exactly what heroes always say," Camille replied with a quiet smile. She hesitated, then added, "There's one more thing you should know. The day Daniel died, he was leading a mission to track down insurgents targeting civilians. He volunteered for it. His final letter said he wanted to live up to the example you set." That sentence hit Malcolm harder than any battlefield wound. For 20 years he'd carried the weight of doubt, wondering if saving Daniel had been a cruel delay, if his sacrifice had even mattered. "He didn't die because of you," Camille said gently, reading him like a book. "He lived the way he did because of you." They sat in silence, 2 lives woven together by service and sorrow, by a profound debt and an even deeper healing. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and steady, covering the city in quiet white. This story serves as a powerful reminder that while some wounds are visible, the deepest scars are often unseen, carried by those who, like Malcolm, sacrificed everything and then found themselves battling a different kind of war at home. His descent into homelessness was not a failure of character, but a systemic oversight, a tragic consequence of bureaucratic labyrinth, inadequate mental health care for veterans, and a society that too often moves on from its heroes once the immediate danger is past. Many veterans face red tape so complex it can feel insurmountable. From getting their disability claims processed to accessing mental health services, this often leads to a spiral of job loss, financial instability, and eventually homelessness. Comparing his initial situation with his renewed benefits and housing highlights the stark reality that crucial support often comes too late or is too difficult to access for those most in need. This isn't just Malcolm's story. It's a testament to countless forgotten heroes living on the margins, unseen, unheard, and bearing burdens we can barely imagine. His journey from the cold streets to a warm apartment, from being a case number to a gunnery sergeant, is a poignant illustration of what happens when dignity and honor are finally restored. The quiet apartment, once a distant dream, began to feel real. Malcolm's days were no longer dictated by the biting wind or the gnawing hunger, but by a newfound peace, a profound sense of security. He stood taller than he had in years, the slump in his shoulders replaced by the proud bearing of the gunny he once was. For years, sleeping on sidewalks, he'd been haunted by a crushing thought. No one remembered. Like none of it mattered anymore. The heroism, the sacrifices, the very essence of his identity, all buried under layers of urban grit and societal indifference. But now, that crushing weight had lifted. The connection forged in that courtroom, born of shared grief and an unlikely twist of fate, deepened between Malcolm and Camille. It wasn't just about Daniel anymore, though his memory remained a sacred bond. Their conversations stretched, often quiet, sometimes punctuated by a shared understanding that transcended words. Camille spoke of the Veterans Court program, of the housing initiatives that stemmed from Daniel's raw, honest letters about how the system forgets its own. She spoke of her continued fight, inspired by the very man now sitting across from her, Malcolm. Still humble, still insisting he just did what needed to be done, found himself becoming an unspoken advocate, a living testament to the truth of their shared mission. Outside, the snow continued to fall, soft and steady, covering the city in a quiet, pristine white, a stark contrast to the harsh, unforgiving concrete that had been Malcolm's world for so long. He looked out the window, a small, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. "For years sleeping on sidewalks," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "I kept thinking no one remembered, like none of it mattered anymore." Camille nodded, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. "But it did," she said, her voice firm, resolute. "To Daniel, to every Marine you saved, and to me." It was the affirmation he had unknowingly yearned for, the validation that his life, his service, his pain, had always held profound meaning. She recalled Daniel's unwavering belief in Malcolm, often repeating his words. The measure of a Marine isn't what he does in front of a crowd. It's what he does when no one's watching. "You lived that," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Even when the world forgot." In that single profound moment, something long broken began to heal. Not just in Malcolm Jefferson, but in every soul forgotten by the system they served. His journey from the anonymity of the streets to the quiet dignity of his own apartment wasn't just a personal triumph. It was a potent symbol for countless others who have fought battles far from the public eye, only to return home to a different kind of war. A battle against indifference, against the invisibility that can swallow a life whole. His story became a living embodiment of the message that dignity doesn't always need glory. This profound healing journey offers a crucial lesson, particularly for our audience, for those who have felt marginalized, abandoned, or like their struggles are unseen. Malcolm's story offers a beacon of hope. Your story matters. Your struggles are seen, and it is never too late for recognition, for healing, for a new beginning. We live in a world where countless individuals, often from vulnerable communities, bear invisible scars, their acts of resilience and courage overlooked. Like Malcolm, they may grapple with feelings of worthlessness, believing their past efforts and sacrifices were in vain. This is a common pitfall, assuming that because society isn't acknowledging you, your contributions somehow lessen. But Malcolm's story teaches us the opposite. The true value of a person, of their actions, is inherent, not bestowed by external validation. For those who want to be allies who wish to help others navigate life's cruel twists, Malcolm's story is a call to action. Look for the unseen heroes around you. A small act of kindness, a sandwich from a cook, a pro bono legal defense, a simple conversation can be the spark that reignites hope. Advocate for systemic change, yes, but also remember the power of individual connection. Be the person who remembers a name, who asks questions, who sees beyond the superficial. Be the one who ensures that no one is truly left behind. Malcolm stood taller than he had in years. "Someone remembered my name," he said softly, a profound sense of peace settling over him. After all this time, someone remembered. It wasn't just about his name. It was about his worth, his service, his very existence finally being acknowledged. In that single, powerful breath, a wound 20 years deep began to close. A testament to the enduring truth that true heroes find dignity not just in glory, but in the quiet knowing that, after all this time, someone finally remembered. If Malcolm's story resonated with you, if it made you think, made you feel, then please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe to our channel for more tales that challenge, inspire, and remind us of the incredible human spirit. Your support helps us amplify these crucial stories. Thank you for listening. Malcolm Jefferson's journey from the shadows of forgotten heroism to the warmth of a remembered life isn't just a story. It's a mirror reflecting a profound truth about our society. There are countless Malcolms among us, individuals often from marginalized communities who have served, sacrificed, and then found themselves battling a different kind of war on their own soil. They are the unseen heroes carrying invisible wounds, grappling with systems that can feel indifferent, and often facing the harsh reality of homelessness, mental health crises, or simply being overlooked. This isn't a problem confined to distant battlefields. It's right here, in our cities and towns, in the alleyways and underpasses. It's a systemic issue that demands our attention, our empathy, and most importantly, our action. So what can we do? First, support our veterans. Research and actively support reputable organizations that dedicate themselves to assisting homeless veterans and those suffering from PTSD and TBI. Look for local housing initiatives, mental health support groups specifically for former service members, and legal aid services that fight for their rights. A quick search for veteran support organizations in your area can yield powerful results. Second, become an advocate. Use your voice. Contact your local representatives and advocate for better veteran care, streamlined benefits processes, and robust mental health services. Support policies that address the root causes of veteran homelessness and ensure that those who served are never left behind. Your voice, when combined with others, can drive real systemic reform. Third, and perhaps most crucially, engage with your community. Look for the unseen heroes around you. The Malcolms of the world are often closer than you think in the quiet corners, in the faces of those struggling to make it through another day. A small act of kindness, a moment of recognition, a genuine question, or simply seeing someone's humanity can make an immeasurable difference. Remember Marcus the cook, whose small acts of generosity carried a hidden legacy. And remember Judge Dubois, who chose compassion and a personal connection over rigid protocol. It reminds us that sometimes the greatest help comes not from grand gestures, but from simple acts of human decency and recognition. Your story matters. Your struggles are seen. And the fight for dignity and justice is ongoing. We encourage you to share your own stories of resilience, of how you've overcome adversity, or how you've helped someone in need in the comments below. Your experiences can inspire others and help us build a community of support. In our next video, we'll delve deeper into the psychological toll of unseen sacrifices, exploring how individuals find strength and purpose after profound trauma, and the incredible power of community in healing. Until then, remember the quiet strength of Malcolm Jefferson, and let his story be a reminder that even when the world forgets, we must always remember the true meaning of honor, resilience, and the unwavering promise. No one gets left behind.